welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, your host, the 80s Mixtaper. I hope you've all had a good start to your new year. Today, we slip into the back six of playlist 32 and continue the good work of the first half of the playlist. The Pretenders, Soft Cell, Queen, David Bowie and Godley and Creme are all coming up. And we also introduce jazz funk maestro SHAKATAK to the picture and the man, the myth, the legend himself, Meatloaf, to end proceedings. As always, we can't play the songs on the pod due to copyright laws, but you'll find playlist links for both Spotify and Apple Music in the episode description, plus a full track listing. So all you need to do is flip between the pod and the music when you're out for a walk, for example, or just listen to the pod and then listen to the music. Anyway, let's not stand on ceremony today. Let's get back to the 80s. Earlier, in 1981, we saw the Pretenders standing firm with Message of Love, a track that felt like a bridge from their seismic debut towards something more polished, yet still dangerously sharp. But as 1981 winds down, the band is in a strange transitional gravity. They've released Pretenders 2, an album that feels like a victory lap and a cry for help all at once. Chrissie Hynde is the undisputed centre of this universe, a woman whose cool is so absolute it almost feels like a physical barrier. But on this next track, that barrier doesn't just crack, it dissolves. It's a cover, but in the way the Pretenders do covers. It's an act of reclamation. It's a song about the desperate hallucinatory comfort of grief. It's the sound of a woman who has everything but wants the one thing she can't have. This is I Go to Sleep, track 8, playlist 32. Press play now. I Go to Sleep was released as a single in November 1981, eventually climbing to number 7 on the UK charts. It is ostensibly a Kinks song, but it's a Kinks song that never actually belonged to the Kinks. Ray Davies wrote it in May 1965, sitting at a piano in his parents' home in Fortis Green, waiting for news about the birth of his first child. He recorded a demo, just him and a piano, that sat in a vault for decades, eventually surfacing as a bonus track in 1998. But before then, and before Chrissie Hynde got her hands on it, the song had been a journeyman's piece. Peggy Lee recorded it in 1965. Cher did a version that same year. Even the Applejacks took a swing at it. But those versions often leaned into the soporific or the pop standard vibes. Chrissie Hynde brought something else, reality. At the time of recording, Hynde was actually dating Ray Davies. Their relationship was famously volatile, a collision of two massive idiosyncratic songwriting egos that would eventually produce a daughter, Natalie, in 1983. But not before they nearly married in a registry office where the official supposedly took one look at them and told them to come back another time. Musically, the Pretenders version is defined by its late 50s pop flavour, and one very specific haunting addition, the French horn. Hynde herself recalled that those little embellishments were what captured her attention. It's that horn that gives the song its cinematic, lonely weight. But there's a darker context to I Go to Sleep that hindsight makes impossible to ignore. This was the final single from the original Pretenders lineup. Within a year of this song's chart run, the band would be decimated. Bassist Pete Farndon, struggling with escalating drug use, would be fired in June 1982. And just 2 days later, guitarist James Honeyman Scott, the man whose melodic sensibility defined the band's sound, would be dead from heart failure. When Chrissie sings about imagining someone is there with her because the loneliness is too much to bear, she's singing a Ray Davies lyric from 1965. But by 1981, she's singing the future of her own band. For track 9, would you believe, another track about loneliness and isolation. But this time we have to talk about a moment which feels like the morning after. In 1981, Soft Cell, the duo of Mark Almond and David Ball, were essentially the kings of the world, or at least the kings of the UK singles chart. Their cover of Gloria Jones's Tainted Love had become a massive early 80s era-defining number 1 hit, a minimalist synth-pop anthem that spent a then record 43 weeks on the US Billboard Hot 100. But Tainted Love was a cover. The question for any unlikely pin-up is whether they can actually write a song for themselves. Soft Cell answered that on November the 2nd, 1981, with the release of Bedsitter. If Tainted Love was the sound of the club at 2 a.m, Bedsitter is the sound of the Sunday morning come down. It is the definitive account of glamour in squalor, a term Mark Armand used to describe his fascination with the seediness of urban life. It's a song about the isolation of the big city, about living in a tiny room with a single bed and nothing but a cup of tea and a sense of profound alienation. Press play now. We're back. Bedsitter was recorded for Soft Cell's debut album, Non-Stop Erotic Cabaret. While the album was largely recorded in New York's Media Sound studio to escape the growing UK hype, the song's DNA is pure Leeds. Before they were stars, Mark and Dave met at Leeds Polytechnic in the late 1970s and eventually lived in a housing association building in a rough part of inner city Leeds. They lived in rooms right next to each other and would exchange cassettes of lyrics and music through the corridor. By day, Mark worked at the Leeds Playhouse bar. By night, he was a cloakroom attendant at the Warehouse Club. That lived experience, the transition from the suburbs to the grime of the city, is what gives Bedsitter its visceral weight. The lyrics detail the mundane tragedy of a solitary Sunday, eating for comfort, writing a letter home to mother, claiming things are getting better, and realising that the Saturday night out was actually just passing time. Lines like, dancing, laughing, drinking, loving, and now I'm all alone in Bedsit land, my only home, paint a vivid picture of isolation amid the hedonism. Musically, Dave Bull built the track on a limited budget using a Revox tape recorder, a borrowed Roland drum machine belonging to Kit Hain, a Korg SB100 synth bass, and a synclavier owned by producer Mike Thorne. Bull noted that the synclavier, which cost roughly £120,000, was their technological advantage over other synth bands of the era. The result was Soft Cell's first self-written chart success. It peaked at number 4 in the UK and proved that they weren't one-hit wonders. It also established Mark Armand as a storyteller for the freaks, the teenagers who felt alone in their own bedsit land. Critic John Savage would later call it one of the greatest songs of the 1980s because it captured the desperate undertow and underbelly of the London club scene. AllMusic journalist Ned Raggett echoed this, calling it one of the most realistic portrayals of urban life ever recorded. The single's cover, shot by photographer Peter Ashwood, added to its gritty aesthetic. Next time, we'll look at a different kind of synth-pop heartbreak as we move towards the final single from this album, the sweeping melancholia of Say Hello, Wave Goodbye, one of my favourite songs of the 80s. Next up, a biggie, a big biggie, used in everything from films to episodes of Gladiators. In December 1980, Queen were the undisputed masters of the bombastic movie tie-in. They'd just released Flash, a track that, despite Brian May's legendary hair and Freddie Mercury's unmatched charisma, was basically a vehicle to sell a campy space opera soundtrack. Queen wrapped up their massive The Game tour that year, which had already given us smashes like Another One Bites the Dust and Crazy Little Thing Called Love, proving they could swing from rock to funk without missing a beat. But 1981, that's when things got even more electric. The band kicked off the year touring Japan and then South America for the first time, playing to massive crowds in places like Argentina and Brazil. Over 130,000 fans in Sao Paulo alone. Amid all of that, they hunkered down in Montreux, Switzerland at Mountain Studios, which they'd bought back in 1979 to work on what would become their 1982 album Hot Space. And that's where fate, or maybe just geography, brought in a wild card. David Bowie, this is Under Pressure, this is track 10. David Bowie didn't end up on this track because of a label executive's master plan. He was just there. Bowie lived nearby in Vevey for tax reasons and was at Mountain Studios to record his own vocals for Cat People Putting Out Fire. According to Queen's engineer David Richards, a simple phone call brought the Starman down to the studio to see what the band was up to. The initial plan was modest. Bowie was supposed to sing backing vocals on a smooth Queen track called Cool Cat. They recorded them, but Bowie didn't like the result and eventually asked for his voice to be scrubbed from the final mix. However, the creative spark was lit. Roger Taylor later recalled that after jamming on some old covers, Bowie said, "This is stupid, why don't we just write one?" What followed was a 24-hour marathon fueled by wine and tension. The foundation was an unreleased Queen demo titled Feel Like, but the song truly came alive when John Deacon played a simple 6-note bass riff. There's a legend that after a dinner break, Deacon forgot the riff entirely and Roger Taylor had to play it back to him. The vocal session was pure Bowie-esque experimentation. He insisted that Freddie and the others go into the vocal booth one by one and sing whatever came into their heads without hearing what the others had done. That's where Freddie's day-to-day scatting comes from. It was a spontaneous improvisation that became the song's emotional core. By the time they reached the mixing stage in New York, the camaraderie had frayed into a battle of wills. Bowie took over the lyrics, changing the title from People on the Streets to Under Pressure. Brian May eventually backed out of the mixing process entirely to let the egos of Mercury and Bowie clash in peace. Released in October 1981, the song became a global smash, hitting number 1 in the UK. Famously, as well as appearing in numerous film and TV episodes, do we even need to mention Vanilla Ice? It remains a miracle of collaboration, a song born from a chance encounter, a forgotten bass line, and two of the greatest voices in rock history, both of whom we have now lost, refusing to blink first. Time to introduce a new group to the mix, with a sound I'd call coffee table jazz funk. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up for a smooth ride back to the early 80s, where jazz funk was bubbling up from the London scene and infiltrating the charts with its infectious grooves. Today, we're diving into a track that captures the era's blend of slick instrumentation and understated cool. Easier said than done by SHAKATAK. This song, with its catchy hooks and unison vocals, marked a turning point for a band that was just finding its footing in the competitive world of British pop funk. This is track 11. SHAKATAK formed in London in 1980. Founded by keyboardist Bill Sharp, keyboardist Nigel Wright, drummer Roger Odell, and guitarist Keith Winter. Sharp, born William Jeffrey Revel Sharp in 1952, has studied music at Birmingham University and worked as a studio engineer at the BBC's Maida Vale studios for 6 years, handling sessions for shows like those hosted by John Peel and Kid Jensen. Before SHAKATAK, Sharp had been in a band with Trevor Horn, who later obviously became famous with the band Buggles and the single video Killed the Radio Star, and then as a producer for acts like Yes and Frankie Goes to Hollywood, and we've met him several times on this pod. Odell brought his precise drumming from a background in jazz, while Winter handled guitars with a focus on Yamaha SG-2000s and Gibson models, amplified through Mesa Boogie gear. Nigel Wright contributed on Fender Rhodes electric piano and synthesizers like the Oberheim OBX and Prophet 10, also arranging brass elements. The initial lineup included bassist Steve Underwood, who played on their debut recordings. Vocals were handled by Jackie Raw from 1980 to 1983, with additional contributions from Jill Soward, who would later become the band's sole lead singer by 1984. The band's name came from a record store in Soho called Record Shack, tweaked to SHAKATAK for a unique twist. They emerged amid the UK's jazz funk boom, drawing influences from fusion acts and blending jazz, funk, soul and pop into a smooth, instrumental heavy sound. Their first release was the single Step In, a Bill Sharp composition issued as a white label pressing in August 1980 on Polydor. It caught the ear of Passion Records owner Les McCutcheon and Northern Soul DJ Kev Roberts, helping secure a deal. This led to their debut album, Driving Hard, released in 1981, which featured tracks like Living in the UK and Brazilian Dawn. By 81, SHAKATAK had built momentum with early singles entering the charts regularly. That year, they released Easier Said Than Done as a single, marking their first top 20 hit in the UK. It introduced their signature instrumental unison vocal style to a broader audience. Written by Bill Sharp and Roger Odell, it features lyrics centred on the refrain, "Say I don't miss you every day, I don't need you anyway, you can take your love away, oh but it's easier said than done." The song climbed to number 12 on the UK singles chart, staying there for 17 weeks, and became SHAKATAK's first mainstream hit. The success of Easier Said Than Done bridged the gap between the specialised jazz funk clubs and the mainstream pop audience. It paved the way for their 1982 album Nightbirds, which would become a global phenomenon, particularly in Japan, where SHAKATAK became superstars. For Bill Sharp, the success meant he could finally leave his job at the BBC to become a full-time musician. The ivory tinkling sound he perfected on this track became the blueprint for a career that is still going strong in 2025, with the band continuing to tour and release new music today. Alright, let's pick up right where we left off with Godley and Creme in 1981. Godley and Creme are having a moment, not just as the video directing visionaries for The Police or Duran Duran, but as pop stars in their own right. Their surprise hit Under Your Thumb, which we heard in episode 29, released in August as the lead single from their fourth album, Ismism, had climbed to number 3 on the UK singles chart, spending 11 weeks there after entering on September the 12th. It was a dark, atmospheric track about a mysterious encounter on a late-night train, blending mysterious lyrics with eerie synths. A real shift from their experimental earlier work after leaving 10cc in 1976. But just a couple of months later, in November, they followed it up with Wedding Bells, the album's second single. This one flips the script entirely to something poppier and more satirical, with Kevin Godley and Lol Creme poking fun at a reluctant groom dodging commitment. It's got that catchy, upbeat vibe masking some biting lyrics about relationships gone stale. Almost like a cheeky nod back to 10cc's I'm Not In Love. The track clocks in at just over 3 minutes, built around programmed synths and drums, reflecting the duo's evolving sound amid personal upheaval. This is track 12. Wedding Bells is a fascinating pivot. On the surface, it's a lush melodic pop song that feels like a spot-on parody of the Motown and 60s pop sounds they had toyed with in their pre-10cc bands like Frabjoy and Runcible Spoon. But because this is Godley and Creme, the lyrics are where the sting is. The narrator isn't a happy groom, he's a man experiencing a sudden crushing realisation of commitment phobia. He admits he was only window shopping and describes himself as a square peg in a round hole. There's a particular cruelty to the line, "Every time we kiss, I feel your kiss is stinging. In the back of my mind, I know you'll always be ringing those wedding bells." Musically, the track is perfectly in tune with the times, featuring a smooth vocal delivery from Kevin Godley that hides the daftness of the underlying theme. The visual presentation was, as always with this duo, essential. They directed the music video themselves, featuring oh-so-perfect choreography that leaned into the song's deceptive lightness. The single's cover art, capturing the striking image of a groom all suited and booted for the big day, with a chain strapping him to the wall. Ismism became the duo's best-selling studio album, peaking at number 29 in the UK. It was a duo affair with almost no guest performances, save for Bimbo Aycock on saxophone. While they would later reach international heights with the 1985 hit Cry, this late 1981 run of Under Your Thumb followed by Wedding Bells remains their most successful consecutive chart performance in the UK. Wedding Bells capped a breakthrough year for Godley and Creme, proving they could score hits without 10cc's Shadow. Let's end today with an explosion and introduce another character to the mix. One who had a very big, meaty late 70s with a rock opera sound no one had come across before. He'll pop up sporadically in the first half of the decade, and then in 1993 have an absolutely massive number one hit with I'd Do Anything for Love, but I Won't Do That. But that is still 12 years away, and also the wrong decade. I am, of course, talking about a particular Mr. Michael Lee Aday, better known as Meatloaf. Our introduction to Meatloaf is pure rock and roll frenzy, a duet that slams together two powerhouses in a way that feels like a bar brawl set to horns and guitars. We're talking about Dead Ringer for Love, the 1981 single from Meatloaf featuring Cher. This song hit the UK charts like a wrecking ball, peaking at number 5 in early 1982, but it barely scratched the surface in the US. Written entirely by Jim Steinman, it's got that signature over-the-top drama, lyrics about desperate romance, a guy chasing a girl with Cher firing back as the no-nonsense counterpart. It's got E Street Band vibes too, with Max Weinberg on drums and Roy Bittan on piano. Released on November the 20th, 1981, as the lead single from the album Dead Ringer, it was produced by Steinman and Jimmy Iovine. The melody actually started life as the theme for the short-lived TV comedy Delta House in 1979, sung by Michael Simmons, before Steinman reworked it. AllMusic's William Ruhlman called the lyrics a humorous but impassioned commentary on romance, while Donald A. Gorisco praised how the vocal histrionics blend perfectly with the horn-heavy instrumental arrangement to create a perfect pop-rock hybrid. But enough hyperbole, this is our final track for Playlist 32. Press play now and enjoy. To really get why this song exists, we need to rewind on Meatloaf himself, since this is our first deep dive into the man behind the myth. Born Marvin Lee Aday on September the 27th, 1947 in Dallas, Texas, he later changed his name to Michael. Meatloaf grew up in a turbulent household. His mother, Wilma Artie Huckel, was a school teacher and gospel singer in a group called the Voice Masters Quartet. His father, Orvis Wesley Aday, was a former police officer who sold homemade cough remedy but struggled with alcoholism, often disappearing on binges that sent young Marvin and his mum scouring Dallas bars to find him. Church and Bible study were weekly staples, shaping that dramatic flair we'd see later. High school at Thomas Jefferson High in Dallas saw him playing football as a defensive tackle, where his coach dubbed him Meatloaf after he stepped on the coach's foot, combining an earlier meat nickname from his size with loaf for good measure. He acted in school plays like Where's Charlie and The Music Man, and after graduating in 1965, he attended Lubbock Christian College, then transferred to North Texas State University. But tragedy struck in 1967 when his mother died of cancer at age 19 for him. A violent altercation with his drunk father, knife involved, pushed him to use his inheritance money to flee to Los Angeles. In LA, he formed his first band, Meatloaf Soul, in 1968, opening for acts like Van Morrison's Them and Question Mark and the Mysterians. The band evolved into Popcorn Blizzard and Floating Circus, releasing a single Once Upon a Time and supporting big names like The Who, The Stooges, The Grateful Dead and MC5. He joined the LA production of the musical Hair, which took him to Broadway. In 1971, he recorded the album Stoney and Meatloaf for Motown with Sean Stoney Murphy. Their single What You See Is What You Get hit number 36 on the Billboard best-selling soul singles chart and number 71 on the Hot 100. They toured opening for Bob Seger, Alice Cooper and others, but he left Motown after a vocal replacement dispute. By 1972, he was in off-Broadway's Rainbow. In 1973, he auditioned for More Than You Deserve at the Public Theatre, meeting composer Jim Steinman for the first time, a partnership that would define his career. That year, he joined the LA Roxy cast of the Rocky Horror Show as Eddie and Dr. Scott, reprising Eddie in the 1975 film of the same name. Steinman and Meatloaf started developing Bat Out of Hell in 1972, ramping up in 1974. Rejected by labels, they got Todd Rundgren to produce. It featured Max Weinberg and Roy Bittan from the E Street Band and was released in October 1977 on Cleveland International, where it sold over 43 million copies worldwide, with hits like 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad, which hit number 11 in the US, and Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Touring was intense. He broke his leg jumping off stage in Ottawa in 1978, but finished in a wheelchair. He hosted Saturday Night Live in March 1978. But success took its toll. By 1979, constant touring, drugs and exhaustion caused him to lose his voice completely. Steinman shifted to his own album Bad for Good in 1981, singing it himself. Meatloaf starred as Travis Redfish in the 1980 film Roadie, which helped him recover his voice and get off drugs. By 1980, he was back working with Steinman, who wrote 5 new songs for what became Dead Ringer, plus a re-recorded More Than You Deserve from Steinman's 1973 musical, and a monologue called Nocturnal Pleasure. Recorded February to June 1981, produced mostly by Meatloaf and Stephen Gelfus, with Steinman and Iovine on 2 tracks, including the title song. The album hit number 1 in the UK, but only number 45 in the US, certified platinum though, across the pond. Now, about Cher's role on Dead Ringer for Love. They'd known each other since 1973. Meatloaf recounted in a 1988 BBC interview on the Terry Wogan Show that he met her at the Rocky Horror's Roxy run, desperately wanting an introduction since both were Texas natives, him Dallas, her with time in Fort Worth. Lou Adler, the show's producer, facilitated it while Cher was there with David Geffen, the recording mogul who she was dating. Meatloaf called Geffen a mega mogul and joked about the name mix-ups. Their friendship endured, leading to the 1981 duet. In the same interview, they reminisced about the music video, directed with sound effects, choreography and dancers, a first for videos, winning the Cannes Film Festival International Video of the Year. Meatloaf performed the song often, with Paddy Russo handling Cher's parts. It's a moment of 80s rock excess, but rooted in real collaboration. It's a 1981 barroom blitz that somehow manages to make rock and roll and brew sound like a tragic lack of a balanced diet. So that's the end of Playlist 32 and nearly the end of 1981. But do join us next week as we finally enter December in Playlist 33, where we get the Christmas number 1. Bucks Fizz take us to the land of make-believe. Duran Duran launched one of the greatest albums ever with one of the strangest choices for a lead single. Status Quo claim it's only rock and roll, and Madness take a Labby-Cifry classic and make it their own. As always, if you can give us a follow and a review on your pod platform of choice, it all helps. But until next time, have a lovely week, take care.